We'll get started here with an introduction. Our presentation tonight is someone who you should all know and be aware of. Claus Niesen, AE0S, is our club secretary, and he's got a presentation I'm actually kind of excited about tonight. I've done a little dabbling with it myself. He's got, it sounds like, a lot more information to share with us about spurious emissions and how they're measured, why it's important, what we have to pay attention to. Some live demonstrations here as well. And I do want to announce it's not part of the club meeting announcement, but we'll have an email that will go out. We wanted to make sure that this was a service, if you will, that was available to all of the club members or anyone else that's interested to come out and have their transceivers measured, just as Claus is going to demonstrate tonight. So on Saturday, February 17th, 10 a.m. to noon, at Vet Med, Mike Lowe, KC0GGA, has coordinated a room there for us. Bring your transceiver. We'll hook it up. We'll do the measurements, or Claus will do the measurements, and we'll get you taken care of. So, just kind of a casual event. Show up if you're interested. Don't if you're not. And with that, that's the kind of the follow-on to today's presentation. So, with that, we'll turn the meeting over to Claus. It will be in a second. All right. You're good to go.
Hey, good evening. One caveat on the radio testing that we're going to do is it has to be low power because I don't have a high power attenuator. So anything 10 watts or low, if you can transmit with 10 watts or lower, that would be fine. So if you do 50 watts, then my spectrum analyzer is gone. Thank you very much for coming. As Paul was mentioning, I'm Claus Niesen, and we're talking about spurious emissions, just so spurious as my spelling here. This is my favorite disclaimer that I'm into amateur radio, and amateur means that I don't really know that much, but I think I do. So take things with a grain of salt on that. Exactly. And I didn't have formal education on that. So what is spurious emission? So if you go ahead and in your spectrum analyzer, put in a signal, you see right here, that is our transmission. So we are on 2 meters transmitting at 145.6 megahertz, and that's our signal that we want to communicate on. And spurious emissions is anything that is not part of the signal. So if you look past here, we see here's a spike and there's another spike. And quite often those spikes are happening on harmonics, but not always. So again, this is the fundamental, the one that we actually want. And then we have the spurious emissions, those other peaks here. Here we can tell that between our signal and the largest spurious emission, right down here we have the table. So the signal is at 44.45 dBm, and the spurious emission right here is at negative 9.48 dBm. So there's a difference between 53 dBm between the fundamental, and in this case, it's about the third harmonic here. So just overview on dBm. You know that you can convert dBm to a specific wattage. So dB is the differential of the signal, just kind of arbitrary. And dBm references to 1 milliwatt. So 0 dBm is 1 milliwatt, and then 10 is dBm is 10 milliwatt, and it's on a log scale as well. That's why these numbers go so nice and crazy. There is a nice online calculator. If you minimize that, you can go to this site, and that does the calculation between dBm and milliwatts for you. then so let's go ahead and see what we are getting here. Why did I do that? Okay, I don't know. I forgot what I should be talking here, but I had here oh, now I remember. I can do a smart thing on my unit. I can change the units over to watts, and then we specify right here what kind of attenuator I have. So in this case, I had 36 dBm attenuation. And with that, I can see right here, I'm transmitting at 27.84 watts. And I didn't really want to do that again. And the spurious emission right here on this side is then 112 microwatts. So that's kind of the overview of spurious emissions. Any questions so far? Otherwise, we continue on and ask the question, what does that have to do with us? So the FCC has an awesome rule right here that says all spurious emission from a station transmitted must be reduced to the greatest extent practicable. If any spurious emission, including chassis, power line, radiation, causes harmful interference to the reception of another radio station, the licensee of the interfering amateur radio station is required to take steps to eliminate the interference in accordance with good engineering practice. That's an awesome rule. It's totally vague, right? Because what is acceptable and what is good engineering practice? Maybe an engineer knows better, but I don't. So there are a couple of other rules that the FCC actually has some numbers for. So right here, this rule, it's stating that for transmitter installed after 2003, the mean power of any spurious emission from a station transmitting or external RF power amplifier transmitting on a frequency below 30 megahertz, so that's our HF frequency band, must be at least 43 decimal below the mean power of the fundamental emission. So you remember we had those two peaks. One was our fundamental peak, and then the second peak is our highest spurious emission. So the difference between those two peaks must be 43 decimal. So the ones we showed before, that was 56 decibel. So if that would be the case on under 30 megahertz, it would be fine. And if you have a transmitter installed before that, it's actually a little bit better on what you can transmit. I'm not going to read through this here. You can go up and look at it. But what I did is this whole paragraph didn't make sense to me, or I couldn't understand it very easily. So I went ahead and did some calculations here. So for the latest ruling, the 34 dB below fundamental, that would mean if you transmit a legal limit, that means your highest fundamental could be 75 milliwatts. That's actually a pretty good transmission there of 75 milliwatts. And so it goes down as your wattage goes down. So on 1 watt, it's 50 microwatts that you could transmit. And here you can kind of compare it to how it was before 2003. And so the numbers were a little bit better. And if we look further back on the ruling, the transmitter built before 1977 or marketed before 1978, you're exempt of the requirement. So if you have like a nice antique one, then only the first ruling applies. That was very vague on the numbers. I'm not totally sure what that means. Now we're going in the VHF frequencies. So between 30 megahertz and 225 megahertz. So that includes our 2 meter band and 1.25 meter band. There, the decimal must be at least below 60 dB, below the fundamental. However, if your transmitter has a power of 25 watts or less, then the mean power of any spurious emission applied to the antenna line must not exceed 25 microwatts and must be at least 40 dB below the mean power for the fundamental emission. but you're not need to reduce it below 10 microwatts. So once you get to 10 microwatts, you're fine. That's kind of like if you, I don't know if any of the low power would fall under that or not. I haven't done the math. And again, if you have a really old equipment, you're fine to transmit again. So the value of the old equipment just went up. So right here is the at 60 dB below fundamental. So if you run 100 watt, you can have 100 microwatts. If you run 50 microwatts, 50 watts, then you have to be at least lower than at 50 microwatts or lower. And most of us run probably something less than that. I guess in the car radio, you're running 50 watts easily. But in a handheld, that's mostly what I was testing. There, because of the 25 microwatts limit on the ruling, for any fundamental that is 250 milliwatts or more, the 25 microwatts really applies to it. Once you go below that, then the 40 dB would apply to it. So it would give you a benefit until you get down to 10 microwatts, and then you can always have 10 microwatts, you're fine. Did that kind of make sense? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about harmonics. I often heard harmonics, our ham bands are set to be harmonics, so you can have one antenna and transmit on various bands easily. But I think it's also on something else, because if we cause interference, most of the time we cause interference to ourselves. So there comes in, you just annoy your friend, the other ham, and they know you and they gonna nag you about that. So right here, I just wrote down some of the harmonics where they kind of lie in respect to the bands that you would transmit.
Hey, Klaus,
Mhm.
that last one went up to the 220 megahertz band.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Between 30 and 225. Nothing for 440 and above?
Exactly. That's the interesting part is there's no numbers for 440. So people, again, don't know what they should go for on the dBs, how much below you need to be or anything. So the very first rule applies to every band, which is good engineering practice, don't cause interference. So this here is all the radios that I had. So those were my test candidates. So I have a whole bunch of Baofangs right here. So those are the UV82s. These two here were actually tri-bands, so they can transmit on 1.25 meter as well. And then I have this Yaesu that also is a tri-bander. And I went ahead, and because the Yaesu FT857 also can do VHF, so I turned down the power on that one and tested that out. And I also had a radio in the car, so I tested that out as well. Why not? Right? What bad thing could happen? So here we go with the first Baofeng. And we see right here, I put in the line at 25 microwatts. That's what I pretty much was going by. And right here, the number one is our fundamental. And then it splattered here all over. So the second fundamental, that's like 5.53 milliwatts. So for any newbie or maybe even old people, I mean, what a fundamental basically means is somebody could turn into 4.39.6 megahertz and they could hear me talking and IDing too, by the way. So, well, one Baofeng down, right? This here is my second Baofeng. Didn't look any better on things. Again, we have a 1.12 milliwatts on the second peak. This one looks a little bit better, but it's still above the 25 microwatts, not milliwatts. This here is a nice one. If you look right here at the fundamental, that transmits at 3.81 watts. That's full power. So I don't know if it splatters across fundamental, if that means that if it splatters has a lot of spurious emissions, if that causes your fundamental power to go down or not. I'm not the expert there. Somebody might be. If you are, let me know. There's another one. So this has a spurious emission right here at 294 megahertz with 32 milliwatts. And this one, not any better right there. So that was all my Baofengs now. So let's look at the other stuff we have. So how does a Yaesu look? Any guesses? So here's the Yaesu, and all these ones are right below the 25 microwatts. So we see here 16.6 and 14.29. So that one was totally fine. And that's running at 5.5 watts. And this here is the Yaesu FT857. So I turned that up to nearly 10 watts. I don't want to run the full 50 watts as mentioned. And there, the spurious emissions don't get anywhere near. So we don't even have that showing on the table here. And then I had this TYT on my car too. That's not a Baofeng. So I was kind of curious how that turned out. Any guesses? Yeah, that kind of shocked me. That one was also not great. This is the same radio on low power. So right here I was running 24.3 watts. Want to see if low power would change much, but it still kind of peaks up there. So that's at 5 watts. And so this is the reason why this is called the why I cried. So basically, I had 2 radios left after this here. Bill is not here, so otherwise he would know now why I bought another radio at the Hamfest last weekend. So let's go ahead and just do kind of a show here. Can you see that? Can we make that bigger, Paul? Do you know? I was wondering if you can remove the side thing.
Clint showed me how to do that. It's under view.
Speaker? No. Immers?
There are more options.
There's one that says a pop out, sometimes that.
You gotta try to immerse it.
Then, so scroll to the bottom there and then grab the more options. Full screen.
Yeah, that's good enough.
Down here. I think that's what
This here?
All that does is force it.
That's good enough. So right here is the spectrum analyzer that I was using. So I don't know if you want to go through the whole setup or not. I'm going to skip that unless somebody wants to see that. Yes? You want to see the whole setup? Okay. So let's do it. Press preset. So basically that resets the whole spectrum analyzer. So what I have is, now let's talk about the setup first. So I'm sweeping here the whole frequency range from 9 kilohertz all the way to 2.1 gigahertz. And I don't really need to change that frequency range. We want to see everything, so we catch any kind of spurious emission. I'm going over to the amplitude. And in here, I set the reference offset because I have here, this is the attenuator, and that's a 30 dB attenuation. So I say right here, 30 dB. And now it calculates that out. When it shows you the wattage, it shows you the correct wattage. Otherwise, it wouldn't know that the signal is already attenuated. So it would show you much lower wattage than you're actually transmitting. The next thing is I go over to the peaks and just turn on the peak table. That will give us the highest, where the peaks are, the frequency and the amplitude. And over, no, that's it actually. Let's go turn that off because this is kind of confusing right now. So right now we are just seeing the dBs. So if I press here the button, so we see this is the Yaesu. We see that the fundamental is 36.3 dBm, and the highest spurious emission is 19. Let me turn on trace so we just have a max hold. Okay. Nope. Didn't hold it. Well, these. Let's go over to a more interesting radio. Easier to explain right here. If you have a mess. So right here we see the, I should put my hand in front of it. Number one peak, that's our frequency. So we transmitted at 145.6. There we have 35.6 dBm. And our highest fundamental is the second one at 439. And that's the spurious emission. So that is 3.9 dBm. So if we add those two together, we get a difference of 39 dBm, kind of, right? And we need it to be at least 40 dBm difference between the peaks. So if we would compare it like to, oh, wait, I did the calculation totally wrong. I need to take 35 minus 3 dBm because that's the difference. Correct? So we get a 32, 31 dBm right there. So the other thing that we can do on the spectrum analyzer is we can switch it over to units to watts. So now we see that we transmitted with 3.65 watts, and our highest spurious emission is 2.46 milliwatts. And we needed to be under 25 microwatts. So we can go over here, show a display line, type in 25 and select microwatts. So this line is 25 microwatts. So any spurious emissions under 25 watts on when transmitting less than 25 watts should be under this line here. And that's obviously not happening on this handheld. And we can try it out also on the 70 centimeter. ACOS testing. So right here we see also a spurious emission at 893 megahertz. That is above that line. Again, we don't really have a ruling on that, so you tell me whether or not that's acceptable or not. So right here we have the Ieyasu, and right there all the spurious emissions are much lower. This is the 2 meter band. Then on the 70 centimeter, let's not take the calling frequency. It's also well below it. Any questions about the setup or this part of the demonstration? That was the UV82, and that's the other that was passing. So those are the same ones that I had on my slideshow as well. So if we look, no, it's one of those four. I'm not really sure which one. So now comes the realization, right? I bought 6 Baofangs at $30 a piece. That was pretty cheap, wasn't it? That's like including shipping and taxes and stuff like that. But add that to 6, you still have $180 that you spend. And you could have bought a Ieyasu for $90, the cheapest one, or even a slightly higher one. So yeah, I ended up buying the VX6R. That's what was tested there. And I bought a second one because you always want to have 2 handhelds, right? Yeah, exactly. So you actually can talk to somebody. The one thing that I really got shocked was the TYT, that failed too. And now I'm kind of a little bit, I don't have any experience, but now I'm kind of a little bit concerned, like what other cheaper model would pass or would not pass? Would an Anytone pass? Would something else pass? I don't know. Would be interesting. So what is next for me? Buying new transceivers. I've been active on that lately. I started exploring a little bit with building low-pass filters to see if I could build a 2-meter low-pass filter on it. And I'm still in the middle of that in the first tries. It's definitely not an easy task to do. The first thing didn't look at all like a filter. And then I actually got a breakthrough, and my low-pass filter looked like a pass filter somewhere much higher. But I actually could use 2 variable capacitors, and I could tune them, and you could see the peaks moving around. So if you ever worked with the pass filters, how you tune them. So I saw that on other videos. So I noticed that, yes, I'm close to something, but not there yet. Another thing that I found is somebody was saying on the internet that they added a capacitor to the internal low-pass filter, and that helped some. I haven't explored that any further, but I have 6 radios that I'm not totally sure what to do with because you really can't sell them either. So exactly. That's another point. One of them I do have to not break because my wife does fox hunting with us, and she uses the Baofeng as a body blocking for fox hunting, and she has very good success with that. And she was saying to me, like, I think it's because of the bad radio and it just accepts the waves in or so. So she never used any quality radio with body blocking. So that's her thought. Would be interesting to see if she can use the Yaesu just as good or not. So now I open it up for questions, or maybe you want to do a discussion about certain things, like is spurious emission really a concern to you, or is the value of a Baofeng just better? Should there be more education maybe about spurious emission? Because I kind of felt like on YouTube, a lot of big YouTubers actually in the ham world bring out the latest, greatest Chinese radio that does awesome things, but you never know, did they actually test it out for spurious emissions? Because, oh, I totally forgot the most important thing. Under the FCC rules, right, everybody knows that a Baofeng isn't allowed to be used for the family radio, because family radio, your radios need to be type approved. That means this radio has to have a certification to be used on the family radio frequency. The same thing for GMS. It also needs to be type approved. The same thing on, what's the other band? MIRS, yeah, the other band. And even commercial ones, they need to be type approved. The only thing the only place where it doesn't need to be type approved is us. We have the benefit. But we also have then the responsibility to make sure that the radios function the way that FCC requires us. Meaning, if you buy a GMS radio and that's approved by the FCC, you don't have to worry about it. So theoretically, I guess we would have to measure it. I don't know.
So do you think Baofeng should even be sold in the US then?
As to the amateur radio, they can be sold, yeah. And if they pass as an amateur radio or you modify it, then you could operate them. Selling and operating is a different story. I mean, in the US, you can sell a lot of things that you can't use. That opens up the question like, hey, organized events, like if you run an event where you do some race and you do the communication for it, or the emergency RS group, you require people that attend to have radios that meet the spurious emissions. And what does that mean? Do you blindly accept anything, certain brands like Kenwood, Yaesu, ICOM? Those are the big 3 brand names. Maybe there are some other ones that you can blindly accept. And if somebody shows up with a Baofeng, you're going to ask them like, hey, have you tested spurious emissions on it or not? I let other people be the police there. And the last question we answered already. Yes.
Yeah, I might know that the ARL lab does test various emissions on almost all of their radios.
Mm-hmm.
If they've tested something and it shows up on QST, at least you know the ones that tested it. And then have people wrong.
Yeah, I looked at that, and it's not the cheap ones that they test. It's all good quality radios. So I think all of the radios that they so far had in the magazine probably passed. Or did you find one that didn't pass? Mm-hmm. Really? I didn't find it, but yeah. Mm-hmm. There was an older document from the ARL where they did the testing on Hamvention, and they had like a table. I don't have that here, but how many of the radios passed and how many didn't based on the manufacturer. And the big 3 were pretty good on that. The big question is now there are so many other new brands that weren't tested back then, and that would be kind of interesting to see. What would we search on? I don't know if you find it quickly.
Let me restate your question there, Mike. I think you're saying for the ARRL equipment review, are they testing multiple different radios? Is that correct?
No, are they testing? Yeah, multiple
For the
radios of the same model.
equipment review,
No, for their reviews, it's a single
Yeah.
radio, and they'll post the results there. They'll also call out if there is an issue, but
yeah,
I don't remember any recent reviews that have noted that it had an issue. I do remember some from several years ago that, a certain issue was there and there was a tweak to a design change or something with one of the final bandpass filters kind of thing. But for the ARRL reviews, it's a single sample. Now, the Hamfest tests, they
That was
did
a large
publish those
sample, yeah.
lists. I have seen that. And it wasn't just at Hamvention. I've seen them at some others as
Mhm.
well, that they'll bring their equipment and offer to test your radio if you've got it.
yeah. The list that I saw was just a few years old.
Yeah.
That's
Did that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, I was just curious if I have
I
a
did,
whole
Mike.
thing the same model as his,
All right.
would mine test similar or would mine be different?
In most cases, yes. Yeah, probably true. Because the RF design's the same. Yeah. If there are any differences, it's going to be small.
As long as their manufacturing is tuning them correctly.
The
setting up.
big
Yeah.
question though is
That's exactly it. Is different components, different parts. different-
Gigapart and QRZ is selling the QRZ1 radio. That's basically a Baofeng where they say they fixed the spurious emission or so. So mhm. The
And I will note as well, one other thing is even within like the Baofeng UV82,
Mhm.
you can find UV82s that are part 95 labeled and others that are not.
And that's one of my questions there. The modifying the internal of the Baofeng. I don't have any clue, but the Baofeng can transmit in a humongous span. And is it in order to support being able to transmit in such a wide band, a frequency range, did they remove some of the components on the filter to make that possible? Yeah, but could be, but could be, yeah. I don't know.
They made it a single band radio and put a really good filter on it, it'd probably be clean.
And it would cost $100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you're using a multi-band type of radio, what you usually do is you have multiple stages with that are on there. Every filter you're adding to the cost
Yeah.
of the radio. They're bypassing that,
By just,
not putting those
Mhm.
on there. That's why.
Skip?
Well, I read a related article and the writer said place to start with a bandpass filter was your antenna, and a well-matched antenna would pass the fundamental and reduce the spurious. Does it or not?
Depends on the antenna.
And
I would say yes, but if you read the FCC's regulation, it specifies that it's the power delivered at the antenna. It says at the antenna. So it doesn't specifically say transmission line. So, but it's at the antenna. So it's not outside the antenna, it's to the antenna. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a real high Q antenna, you're still not meeting the spectral purity requirements.
Yeah, and there's a difference, and I think in that article, it talks about that amateurs are measured into the device with an RF connector. And like part 90 things are with the supplied antenna and they're holding it next to the antenna. And if it's a bad antenna, then that antenna filters off some spurious emissions and they'll pass part 90, but they won't pass for us because we're connecting directly to the antenna jack for our test method versus theirs. It's next to the antenna in their test method. And like 10 years ago, I was trying to buy some part 90 Baofangs for a radio cache that we use for Aries. And I got down the rabbit hole and found the FCC documents that the Baofeng company had submitted to them saying that this lab had evaluated this radio and said it passed part 90. And if you read the specs on the radio, it doesn't match the radio they're selling. And so I think that's how they got their part 90 certification, is it's not the same radio that the lab had that what they're selling in the US, because it said it was a 3-watt radio and it was like a single band radio. And that's sure not a UV5R, that's they're 5 watts and multi-band. So it's been 10 years. It's been a while since I remember that, but I distinctly remember thinking this, they faked the documents to get this label put on.
Yeah, that's characteristic of that company. Our organizations try to pull data out of them, and it's not gonna happen. They may give you, like in this case, well, here is a document, has nothing to do with what you're asking. Maybe we can fool you this way, you know, so, yeah, I mean, that's just a characteristic of that company, that they don't need to provide that documentation. They're selling radios like crazy, you know?
None of them were passing.
Yes, but
There's no
for
enforcement.
amateur service, theoretically, as long as they theoretically only target the hams, they're okay.
But then it's on us.
Yes.
Yep.
We could potentially get fined if we're not on.
So there leads the question, you need to know where your spurs are so you can try to determine who you're gonna be interfering with.
Yeah.
If you don't have.
You can't.
You just can't have the spurs, period. You do. You don't use the radio.
What he is saying is, if your spur is in the police frequency, it's worse than if it's in the CB
Well,
frequency.
yeah, but if you want to get down to it, it's not legal either way.
It's same illegal, but the FCC will hunt you down more likely one way than the other way.
Klaus, okay, question on
Yes.
Zoom. I shared a link in the chat to another test or another website that with some test results while we were chatting, and just thought you'd find it interesting because it does have a number of the other inexpensive brands and the number of radios that have been tested. So Baofeng is definitely the outlier from the table that's on this. Scroll down a little bit.
Oh, that's a list
That's the ARRLs.
that we were talking about, I think.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No,
If
it's
you
not
look at that
sorry.
two-
It's awesome.
If you look at the 2019 results, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so
Well, and scroll up just a bit there, Klaus. I think it does illustrate, I think that was Bill who spoke up there, is if you look at the percentage of non-compliant of the Baofeng, down just a bit, in 2016 is lower than it is in 17, and it's higher yet in 19. So I think that does reflect an issue that some were alluding to there. If you take into account the actual non-compliant versus some that are borderline,
Oh, okay.
gotten worse. 57 truly non-compliant versus 69 in 17 versus 78 in 19.
It's just the borderline that changed. The passing one didn't do much.
Does any camp find spurious emission about thing? My guess is no.
I was just going to say, if you find that news article, share it, because I think we'd all,
I doubt it, but on the other hand, we should be good stewards of the frequency that we use.
100%.
Yeah. Because when they finally start enforcing it, they're gonna come down pretty hard.
And I think the bad thing that we did in the past year is we say like, hey, great, your new ham, you should buy a Baofeng kind of thing. We were encouraging them quite heavily. And I mean, I bought them and they were like pretty awesome, they're rugged and you just don't care. And you don't see that the spurious emission or anything like that. So if you have a Baofeng and you happily want to transmit, don't test your radio.
So how much you selling your Baofengs for?
What, you need some?
$50 each.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're going to throw them away versus you can get at least $10 out of them over here.
I still have that project with that capacitor thing. We'll see what happens there.
Any other questions for Klaus? Awesome. Join me in thanking Klaus for his presentation.